we are at a historic moment, 1 century exactly, after the most spectacular miracle that history has ever recorded. The only one really that can be compared to it would be one that happens in Scripture itself, when in the history of Joshua, obedient unto man, God makes the day longer, and the sun is seen to stand firm in the air so that the battle can be won. It's with the sun that Our Lady seems to play on this day, 13th of October, the culmination of all the Fatima events. That this happened, there can be no doubt. It's just too well documented. But people have been puzzled because the fact is they were terrified when they saw this coming down. Many thought it was the end of the world or something of that nature. They screamed, and many were converted on the spot. And yet it wasn't in itself meant to be a portent of terror. However, it would seem that that is not entirely absent, and we need to try and read between the lines. I was with you on this very day. Was it last year or the year before?
Last year.
And we talked about it, do you remember? Because we had a little physics lesson during the homily. And actually it was picked up by those who saw it on YouTube that you were answering quite correctly. Because we went into what the sun does and how it works. And we looked for an instant at the way that in physics, matter cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be changed in form. And with regard to energy, something is similar, but there's a frontier area where if you do something to an atom to disturb it, you can actually create a huge amount of energy by, as it were, disintegrating its structure. So it's called fission, and it's the basis of what the sun does all the time. It's therefore emitting a huge amount of heat and light. Makes everything on Earth work, actually, if one traces back what works on Earth. And so, the fact that she was using the sun to get a message across is not, perhaps, without meaning. Because looking back now over what has happened in the last century, we have seen what was not thought about at that time, that man can do something of that. And actually, right now, in this very moment of history, we're a bit nervous. I think you know why. Because we've got 1 or 2 people on this planet who are acquiring a lot of power to play with gadgets of that nature, but may not have the responsibility needed to accompany it. I think you know what I mean. And so, this actually could be more contemporary than we think, 100 years down the line. In human history, if one looks at what has happened, there has always been a pattern. And in fact, that comes through in the messages of Fatima itself. Our Lady clearly did warn that things were conditional. And we have this message coming across. If humanity does not listen, then... And then we have precisely the question of another war again coming. That was the Second World War, and it happened, which was worse than the first, as she prophesied. But the thing is that we're not quite sure whether that has all yet finished. And there's a huge question mark hanging over the development of Fatima. Is it going to be precisely really now, rather than then, that this is all going to materialize? In which case the question of this horrible experience of too much light and warmth and heat coming towards the earth could be something that we would, unfortunately, will have to face. Question mark, I don't know. Nobody knows. But there's one thing clear. We have, in our time, more interventions of our Blessed Lady than ever before in human history. Therefore, that in itself would be a discrete hint. She probably is trying to get that hint across that we're in danger and we're our own worst enemy. Liturgically, in the Old Rite, this is the feast of the last of the old line of kings in England, Edward. He was a holy king, so much so that he could actually work miracles, and he saw visions. And he lived as brother and sister with his wife, Edith, which means, of course, they had no children, and he nevertheless was able to designate peacefully by some kind of sign Harold as the one who would succeed him, and that eventually William of Normandy would be heir. And that's what actually happened in 1066. Now, many things happened under the reign of this good example and model. He was a peaceful man, and because he was working hand in hand with God, God was able to sanctify the realm, and things concretely would happen. He brought in good secular superiors as abbots, and not just abbots becoming bishops, which was the case in England massively until then, but people who were genuinely good priests becoming bishops as such, from actually outside the country quite often. But he did protect the monastic life, and I think you probably know the great thing that he's left us forevermore. The greatest abbey in the whole of the British Isles was built really by him. At one stage he was deflecting 1/10 of his income to the building of it, and it was to be the place where the kings of England would be crowned and buried, and he was the first king of England to be buried there, and he's still there. They did not disturb his holy tomb, and in fact Pope Benedict wanted to go there to venerate it, and he did, moved. It was a great link with the old England of before, Westminster Abbey. And if you go to Bayeux in Normandy and look at the Bayeux tapestry, done at the time by holy women, you will see that event, and you'll see the hand of God, as it were, peering through a cloud and blessing that finished building. It was able to be consecrated just before he died. A reminder that actually God is honoured by a building. Do you know that one time St. Faustina was going into a church in Poland where she'd never been before, and she was hit between the eyes by the atmosphere of otherness and majesty that was suggested by this building, and she heard this voice inside her: this is how I want it to be. The Lord was honoured by a building which suggested him. Now that's kind of important, because we can do it. We in some way enthrone God, and even at home in some way you can do it. It's one thing to put up pin-ups of any kind on a wall. It's another to put a good statue and to honour it with flowers, holy water, a cloth, and a burning tea light. One enthrones in some way the presence of God, and one hands over even one's domestic church to the Lord. It matters the way we honour heaven on earth, and that honour comes back to us. The Lord honours those who honour him. Now that's important, because that's one thing that we can do. Whatever we do in church itself, we have our own ambience in which we live, sanctified. I just want to go into one thing. Our Blessed Lady cares for her children. You know that England was called her dowry. It was a very Marian country, and she was, as it were, devastated when she saw what was happening. Even Walsingham was completely destroyed, and she was greatly venerated. And all the shrines of Our Lady were more or less desecrated. The only place that survived in some way in Britain was St Winifred's Well in Wales, because of the miracles. That has a continuous history. It still works. It's still bubbling forth, ice cold water. A continuous miracle, never stopped. That indicates what was lost. Can you imagine what England would be like now had it not been for the loss of the Catholic faith? I'm sure that we would have a very dignified liturgy. Those beautiful churches built and still there as Anglican churches now would have been the perfect place to have a noble liturgy, because in the English spirit it's still there. Each culture does things in its own way. Unfortunately in Ireland we have good, well-built churches, those that were built before the 60s, who are classic, And we could, if we wanted to, have something similar, but alas we don't. We don't make use of our churches. And we don't make use either of what we have, the well-said rosary. I think you know what I mean. The tragedy that heaven sees is many rosaries, but few prayed with the heart. Let's not fall into that trap. That bit we must do. And remember, heaven is not interested in what is not honouring it. And we can't fool heaven. Heaven knows full well the difference between a word meant and a word said, as in human relationships. If we're praying, we must do so well. I just conclude, all our day and all our home must be under the divine will. That includes everything, e.g. our food. It's important to pray before and after, and to thank God and to honour God by the very fact that we exist one more day. Never live in, as it were, a mode in which God is not present in your action. All that you do must be elevated and done in that presence. Concludo con qualche parola perché c'è il contingente dall'Italia qui. Questo è importante anche per noi. Abbiamo l'invito dal cielo di pregare con il cuore. La Madonna ha chiesto 6 volte a Fatima al quotidiano del rosario. È importante fare questo con cuore, perché si sa la differenza tra un rosario pregato e un rosario recitato. Come nel rapporto umano, quando si parla si sa bene, quando si fa con il cuore, soltanto con le labbra. Chiediamo questa grazia di avere un'intercessione anche sentita per il mondo, come la Madonna l'ha chiesta a Fatima, perché questo rosario è lo strumento contro il diavolo e il demonio lo sa bene, e la sua forza esce fuori spesso, l'esorcisma non può tollerare il Santo Rosario.